Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Airstrikes hit Kyiv early this morning in an attack, according to its regional military administration. Australia is set to train Ukrainian troops, ships 30 more armored vehicles to Ukraine. And Israel's President Isaac Herzog says there are limitations on supplying Ukraine with air defense systems. A warm welcome to the program. We begin with updates on several airstrikes hitting the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, early this morning. According to Oleksiy Kuleba, head of the Kyiv Regional Military Administration, the strikes hit a community in the region, adding that even though the fire was extinguished and the local air defense forces have taken out some, quote, enemy objects from the sky, no casualties have been reported. And Australia says it will deploy 70 soldiers to Britain to help train Ukrainian troops there and ship 30 more armored vehicles to bolster Kyiv's war against Russia's invasion. Australia, one of the largest non-NATO contributors to the West's support for Ukraine, has been supplying aid and defense equipment and has banned exports of alumina and aluminium ores, including bauxite, to and from Russia. It has also placed sanctions on hundreds of Russian individuals and entities.
We expect this now to be a protracted conflict. That's really what has evolved over the last few months. We've obviously put in place a very significant package of support for Ukraine already, and we're in the process of getting that to Ukraine, and Ukraine is very grateful for it. But we're mindful that Ukraine needs to now be supported over the longer term if we're going to put Ukraine in a position where it can resolve this conflict on its own terms. And so this tranche is very much focused on that, both in terms of making sure that we are helping in a UK-led initiative in respect of training, and also extending the line of Bushmasters that we will be providing to Ukraine.
And the chief UN lawyer pushed back on a Russian argument that Secretary General Antonio Guterres cannot report to the Security Council on Western accusations that Moscow used Iranian-made drones in Ukraine in violation of a 2015 resolution. Russia has argued that there is no mandate for Mr. Guterres to send UN experts to Ukraine to inspect the downed drones. Tehran denies supplying the drones to Moscow, and Russia has denied its forces used Iranian drones to attack Ukraine. Mr. Guterres reports twice a year to the Council, traditionally in June and December, on the implementation of a 2015 Council resolution that enshrines the Iran nuclear deal. Any assessment of the drones in Ukraine would be included in that report. Russia had said last week that it will reassess cooperation with Mr. Guterres if he sends experts to inspect the drones.
The Secretary General has not received any request pursuant to paragraph 6G of the note or otherwise that supplements or modifies the nature and scope of the work done by the Security Council Affairs Division in the preparation of the Secretary General's 6 monthly reports to the Council. Absent further guidance by the Security Council, the Secretary General will continue to prepare these reports in the manner that they have been prepared to date.
10 Security Council members, including United States, accused Iran of violating Resolution 2231, despite the fact that these certain states continue to violate all their explicit legal obligations under that same resolution. The main example is the illegal withdrawal of the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is still openly used as bargaining leverage today. Without a doubt, continuing such unlawful acts violate international law, the United Nations Charter, and Security Council Resolution 2231.
The claim Russia is making is dumbfounding, simply dumbfounding. Once again, Russia has wasted the Security Council's time to deflect attention from its own egregious wrongdoing. Russia claims that requests from the United States and other countries that the Secretary General investigate Russia's and Iran's violations of UN Security Council Resolution 2231 are a supposed violation of Article 100 of the Charter. Article 100 provides that, and I quote, the Secretary General and the staff shall not seek or receive any instructions from any government, unquote. The requests of the United States and other council members were not instructions. They, similar to countless other requests made to the Secretary General by UN member states, were requests that he take appropriate action. The United States and other requests that the Secretary General investigate the latest violations by Iran and Russia were appropriate and urgently needed. Russia's response that the Ukraine report should be treated differently and that the UN leadership should block the investigations typically undertaken in these cases is deeply troubling and inconsistent with years of this Council's practice.
In using Iranian drones to attack civilians as well as civilian and critical infrastructure of Ukraine, Russia is violating the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and the Security Council resolution. We see enough evidence to deem that the transfers of UAVs from Iran to Russia should be considered. Moreover, the international community should be informed based on the results of this investigation.
And Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian says his country was no supporter of the war in Ukraine. Speaking during a joint news conference following a meeting with Belarusian Foreign Minister Vladimir Mekin and Tehran, he said, quote, "We invite Ukrainian officials to provide any evidence of this allegation, that is the use of Iranian weapons by Russia in Ukraine, in a bilateral summit of technical experts." Britain, France, and Germany have called for a United Nations probe of accusations that Russia has used Iranian-origin drones to attack Ukraine, allegedly violating a UN Security Council resolution. Iran's foreign minister says Iran will not remain indifferent if it is proven that its drones are being used by Russia in the Ukraine war, amidst allegations that the Islamic Republic has supplied the drones to Moscow to attack Ukraine. CIA Director William Burns made an unannounced stop in Ukraine in order to pass intelligence to the country's military and hold discussions with President Vladimir Zelensky, where he reiterated Washington's commitments to back Kyiv for the long haul. The agency head visited the war-torn nation earlier this month, the outlet had reported, citing an unnamed U.S. official. But Mr. Burns last visited Ukraine at the start of the year before Russia attacked its neighboring state in late February, meeting with officials in Kyiv to discuss the then impending military action. Those trips highlight an ongoing intel-sharing relationship between the United States and Ukraine, with Virginia Senator Mark Warner, who heads the Senate Intelligence Committee, claiming last month that such cooperation has helped Kyiv's troops make great gains on the battlefield. Israel's President Isaac Herzog says there are limitations that prevent his country from supplying Ukraine with certain air defense systems. But he also said Israel was willing to supply non-lethal products. The Israeli president took exception to criticism about Israel's stance on supplying weaponry, noting that the United States and Europe have also declined to provide some types of military equipment to the Kyiv government. He noted that Israel was, quote, analyzing the situation when it comes to the Russian deployment of Iranian-made drones in the conflict. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Russia has so far used around 400 Iranian-made drones to attack Ukrainian cities and infrastructure since the invasion started. The Ukrainian leader also said this week that Russia could be paying Iran for drones by providing assistance for Iran's nuclear program. Russia rehearsed its response to a nuclear attack in an exercise involving nuclear submarines, strategic bombers, and ballistic missiles at a time when tensions are high over a, quote, dirty bomb allegation it has made against Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin remotely observed the annual exercise called GROM, or Thunder, which uses test launches to put Moscow's nuclear forces through their paces in a show of force designed to deter and intimidate foes. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu told Mr. Putin the exercises had practiced delivering a massive nuclear strike by strategic offensive forces in response to an enemy nuclear strike. In another development, the UK government has delayed its budget by more than 2 weeks by new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, some time to make difficult choices about how to tackle the country's profound economic crisis. Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt will now deliver the government's medium-term fiscal plan on November the 17th, according to a statement from the Treasury. It had been scheduled for October the 31st after the date was previously pulled forward by more than 3 weeks in a desperate attempt to reassure investors spooked by huge unfunded tax cuts promised by former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Mr. Sunak, Britain's third Prime Minister in 7 weeks, took office on a Tuesday with a pledge to fix the mistakes Ms. Truss had made. He told lawmakers that the government would have to take difficult decisions to restore economic stability and confidence. Ms. Truss's mini-budget of September 23 crushed the pound and caused a rout in the bond market, sending UK borrowing costs, including mortgage rates, soaring. And a ban on shale gas fracking in England has been restored by new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in his first Prime Minister's questions. His predecessor, Liz Truss, had lifted the ban on the controversial process where there was a local consent. In his first full day in the job, Mr. Sunak also defended reappointing Suella Braverman as Home Secretary just days after she quit over data breaches. During Prime Minister's questions, he would not commit to increasing benefits in line with prices. However, Mr. Sunak said he would continue to protect the most vulnerable. His spokesman also refused to comment on whether the state pensions would rise with inflation ahead of a statement by the Chancellor next month. And the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has met President of Guinea-Bissau and chairman of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, Umaru Sissoco Embalo, in Kyiv. Mr. Embalo said that he visited Russia the day before and talked to President Vladimir Putin, who thinks that a direct dialogue between the two countries, which are sisters, would be important and desirable. Moscow, which has the world's largest nuclear stockpile, has launched a wave of conventional missile and drone strikes targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure since October the 10th. Kyiv says they have damaged up to 40% of its power infrastructure. Ukrainian President Zelensky also ruled out talking to President Putin after Russia proclaimed the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions and rained missiles on Ukrainian cities in the wake of an attack on a vital bridge between Russia and annexed Crimea. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has told Parliament that the only way to facilitate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine is to help Kyiv to defend itself militarily. Ms. Meloni has repeatedly pledged support to Kyiv, while her coalition allies Silvio Berlusconi and Matteo Salvini have been much more ambivalent on the issue due to their historic ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ms. Meloni said that while the arms Italy supplies to Ukraine are not decisive for the outcome of the war, they are vital for Italy to maintain its international credibility. And Ukraine's Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov says Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces in the southern Kherson region is proving more difficult than it was in the northeast because of wet weather and the terrain. Kyiv's forces are piling pressure on Russian troops in the strategically important Kherson region, occupied by Moscow since the start of its February 24th invasion, threatening President Vladimir Putin with another big battlefield setback. Mr. Reznikov says he expects Ukraine to take delivery of sophisticated anti-aircraft NASAM systems provided by the United States in the next 10 days.
The counteroffensive campaign in Kherson direction is really more difficult than it was in the Kharkiv direction. It's my personal opinion, because we have 2 reasons of that. First of all, south of Ukraine, it's an agriculture region. And we have a lot of irrigation water supply channels. And Russians use them like tranches. The second reason, it's a weather condition. Because this is a rainy season, and it's very difficult to use armed carrier, fighting carrier vehicles and etc. with the wheels, only with the tracks. It became a little bit tiny options and for our armed forces of Ukraine. My personal opinion, he will not use nuclear weapon. They did a lot of stupid things, but they continue to be pragmatic.
Ukraine's Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov. And coming up after the break, UN aid chief relatively optimistic that Black Sea grain export deal will be extended. Details in a moment. Please stay on. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The United Nations aid chief, Martin Griffiths, says he is, quote, relatively optimistic that a UN-brokered deal that allowed a resumption of Ukraine Black Sea grain exports will be extended beyond mid-November. Mr. Griffiths traveled to Moscow with senior UN trade official Rebecca Greenspan earlier this month for discussions with Russian officials on the deal, which also aims to facilitate exports of Russian grain and fertilizer to global markets. Under the July 22 agreement, Ukraine was able to restart its Black Sea grain and fertilizer exports, which had stalled when Russia invaded its neighbor on February the 24th. The Ukraine export deal was initially agreed for 120 days.
We are keen to see that renewed promptly now. It's important for the market. It's important for just continuity. And I'm still relatively optimistic that we're going to get that. We're working hard. I think those are the words we're using. We're working very hard to do that. We went to Moscow, Rebecca Greenspan and I. We had very useful meetings there. I think we all understand the issues. We're very keen not only to have that Black Sea operation renewed for as long as the parties would allow, but also for the extraordinary work that Rebecca and her team are doing on removing those impediments to Russian grain and fertilizer exports to happen. Force in the Central African Republic. Prior, I think he was Director of Operations. I think we should have another look at some of those to see if they, maybe simplify them in some ways. I'm, of course, one of those who wants to see the Black Sea operation go as far as it can and be expanded if it can be. Well, I think we're now about 9 million tons have gone through that, which is an extraordinary number. I hope we will reach 10 million before the renewal. But the sooner we can get that tick that box of renewal, the better.
Has enough gone to humanitarian purposes?
You're asking me. There's never enough for humanitarian purposes. Much more than is alleged by some. Much more than is alleged by some. I think it's over half the grain has gone to the low-income countries and lower middle-income countries in the south. But, this agreement was signed by all people on the basis of it's a commercial enterprise. We would not have the volume if it hadn't been a private sector-driven enterprise. Everybody knows this. Russia, Ukraine, Turkey and us knew that that's the basis of the operation. It was not intended at the time to be an operation which was all humanitarian. We understood clearly, and I think we've been borne out, that the impact of that rather elaborate and large export across the Black Sea has had a humanitarian impact on prices, as you know, as well as on quantities, as well as on confidence. And so it's doing what we had negotiated. And I don't think anybody need have any doubt about that.
United Nations aid chief Martin Griffiths. And Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has told Parliament that Italy needs to rewrite its windfall tax on energy companies that have benefited from surging oil and gas prices. The previous government, led by Mario Draghi, expected to fund part of its measures to soften the impact of the energy crisis on firms and families through a 25% windfall tax on energy groups, but revenues have proved much lower than expected. Ms. Meloni also said her government was ready to work on national measures to separate gas prices from those of other energy sources, provided rules could be agreed at the European level. Let's talk now to Dr. Tony Agbon's researcher, senior lecturer at the Anglia Ruskin University in the British capital, London. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Ladi.
When last we spoke, we were talking about interesting times, and we were waiting, hopefully, that sometime this week, towards the end of this week, we would have a new British Prime Minister. It didn't take that long. By Monday, all the dice had been rolled, and Rishi Sunak had emerged. But first, let me find out from you, how is he being received? His first steps on quietening down the financial and economic crisis caused by the previous government, especially as it relates to pensioners, the story about pensioners and their pensions rising in line with inflation, and then not committing to allowing wages rise with, you know, all the usual parameters that Britain has been used to, and his continued statement that tough decisions are ahead, painful decisions are ahead.
Thank you, Ladi, for your question. Like you said, we actually expected that at least by Friday, the new Prime Minister will come in. But because of the tactical move made by the 1922 selection committee, by reducing the threshold for nomination to 100 MPs backing a candidate, I think they were able to cut short the time. And Rishi Sunak actually emerged. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson pulled out of the race, and Penny Mordaunt, the current leader of the House of Commons, she couldn't garner the required 100 votes, so she sensibly pulled out as well. And Sunak, you know, like they call him the Prime Minister inevitable, because he should have actually been the Prime Minister since September when Liz Truss came in. But the party members chose otherwise. So he has come in. He seemed to have settled in. From the speeches he's made so far, yesterday he was at the he had his first Prime Minister's question. A bit nervous, as is expected for a new man at the helm of affairs, but he did pretty well. But like you have said, his in-tray is, I don't envy Rishi Sunak at the moment. His in-tray is a loaded desk. But he hasn't really committed to taking some drastic measures yet, and understandably so, because the budget statement that was going to be made on the 31st October has been pushed to 17th of November. I think they needed time to really think things through very properly. There's a lot of, he's coming in, to answer your question directly, has been received with mixed feelings. And I will just explain that. First, a lot of the British population believe that we should actually go into a general election. Because some people feel that he hasn't got the mandate of the British people. But on the other hand, going by the parliamentary system of government that is operated here in the United Kingdom, the other people on the other side also feel that he's got the mandate, because this party was elected for a 5-year term, and they began in 2019, and the next election should be 2024. So there's that argument and debate going on. But whether Rishi Sunak will be Prime Minister until the next general election, I think will depend on his performance in office. Like you mentioned the pensioners issue now. Because of the rising cost of living, high level of inflation, which is already above 10% here in the UK. Pensioners are really struggling, not just pensioners. I think a large chunk of the population are struggling to make ends meet and put food on the table, heat up the home and all that. The UK have put a lock on pension rising. So we are hoping, people hope that he may remove that lock. But removing that lock is also going to trigger a lot of agitation from other sectors of the UK working population, like the rail workers have been on strike several times, even before now, postal workers, teachers in primary, secondary, and colleges. So these are all the issues on the table for Rishi Sunak. I don't envy him at all.
Now, let's look at it a bit more deeply. There is, of course, the energy crisis that he didn't create, but he's now going to have to deal with. And that's what has led to what you called the cost of living crisis and the caps that have been placed on how much households will be paying and businesses, assistance for businesses and so on. Part of what created the crisis for Liz Truss was that many in the financial markets didn't see where the money to pay for all of this was going to come from, and that's what Rishi Sunak had indicated when you said he ought to have been Prime Minister when he faced off against Liz Truss, because he said Liz Truss's plan was not viable, and so it has proved. But now he has got to deal with it, and I'm sure there are those who are saying, okay, so if this other plan was not good, what is your plan? Many have made so much. There in the picture is Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, who resigned in a huff after a shouting match with Liz Truss. And in fact, just like Rishi Sunak proved to be the downfall of Boris Johnson, Suella Braverman proved to be the final straw for Liz Truss. So I want you to look at this. Big egos in the cabinet and yet tough decisions to be made. How do you think this youngest man to be British Prime Minister will go through this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, very young man. But I think looking at the cabinet that Rishi Sunak has assembled, I think something that is going to really bode well for him is the experience. He's brought back a lot of experienced technocrats. Dominic Raab, the former Deputy Prime Minister under Boris Johnson, is back as Deputy PM and Justice Minister. He was able to hold on to Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. He's brought back Michael Gove as Levelling Minister. Nadine Zahawi is there, though a minister with her portfolio, but is there as party chair as well. And some others, even the Braverman you mentioned, Suella Braverman, has been brought back, although that has become a kind of albatross for Rishi Sunak. There's a lot of complaint on that. So the team he has assembled is very experienced. And one other thing that is going to go well for Rishi Sunak is that he has been Chancellor. He was Chancellor for 2 years until he resigned under Boris Johnson. So he knows the game. He comes from a banking and investment background. He understands the market. And like you said, Ladi, he actually predicted during the electionary campaign with Liz Truss that Liz was just playing to the gallery. And exactly that is what happened. So I think he's deft enough. He's got the tactical acumen, and he's been able to bring both the left and right-wing side of the party together. He's made appointments, even some junior ministers. He's been very, very thorough with his appointment. And with the party solidly supporting him, I think he will, he will do well, except for the externalities coming from the Russia-Ukraine crisis. That, to me, is a major problem we are facing with regards to the energy crisis and the cost of living.
I'm happy you mentioned the externalities, because that's where I was going to go next. These are things that he is not in total control of and have been complicated by things that happened beforehand. There was Brexit, then COVID, and now the war in Ukraine, all coming one after the other in fairly quick succession. All that has impacted the cost of living. Then there is the place of the United Kingdom on the international stage and how it has managed to meander, particularly with this war. One of the very first phone call I understand that Rishi Sunak had was with Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, which I guess signals something in terms of robust continuity of support for Ukraine. But then when you put that on one hand and you put it side by side with the fact that Rishi Sunak has to get the UK out of a financial hole, how much wiggle room does he have to continue that kind of support when he has to do this domestic priority agenda that is the only thing that will probably keep him in office, as you said, till 2024?
Yeah, the external factors are very, they are huge, and it's one of the things that led to the demise of Liz Truss as Prime Minister here. I feel that Rishi Sunak, he as a new man, he should also rally other world leaders. There have to be a solution to the Russian-Ukraine crisis. Somebody, have to pick up the gauntlet and be a statesman so that Russia and Ukraine can come to the negotiation table. So probably if he can do that, as especially with somebody British Asian background, so he has to do something magical, because it is very clear that the military option may not solve this Russian-Ukraine crisis. There's possibility of high escalation. Yesterday, we saw in the news President Putin himself, observing some nuclear drills by the Russian military. So an early resolution of this Russian-Ukraine crisis will be a masterstroke from Rishi Sunak. That is on the foreign affairs. Then domestically, something I also believe that Rishi Sunak can also look at, but I doubt if he's going to do it, because he's a staunch capitalist, is to revisit the issue of windfall tax for the energy company. Following your reports before this program started, you can see that Shell Petroleum have declared massive profits. Chevron, all these oil companies are declaring massive profits. So it is something that can be visited. It shouldn't just be a closed case. We know that the elite in society, they have a way of playing the game, the political and economic game to their advantage. But if he can do something different, it's something that should be revisited, because now they are talking about raising taxes, probably again in the UK, corporation tax for businesses. So this may, have a backlash on his government, because he needs to have the people on his side. So that is what I think he should do as a masterstroke.
He's going to meet with a mix of leaders on the international stage as British Prime Minister. I mean, domestically, as you said, he's assembled a team of big egos, some technocrats, but many of those egos are likely to come to play in the coming days. These are significant political figures, the likes of Dominic Raab and Michael Gove and the likes would be in the cabinet. But on the international stage, he's going to come up against, particularly Europe, he's going to come up against the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, and the likes of French President Emmanuel Macron, and of course the big among the big, the US President Joe Biden and the others. How do you think he's going to play on that stage? Because prior to now, he hasn't really been on that stage. He's been focused mostly on Britain's domestic financial position.
Yeah, he's very, very correctly. He's relatively young in the political space. He's not very experienced, but like we always say in politics and governance, sometimes inexperience can be the genius because he really, in his mind, he has no loyalty to anything. So I think he's very cerebral, quite intellectual. Some people have even described him as a polyglot. So his inexperience may also be to his advantage because he's going to be really speaking without any allegiance to or friendship to anybody. But it could also be a disadvantage when he meets with some of these very experienced world leaders you have mentioned. They all need to come together and find a diplomatic solution to the military invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I really think he has to take the bull by the horn and lead that course. Indeed.
And we'll wait to see how he does that in the coming days and months, and we wish him the best. Thank you so much, Dr. Abons, for your time and perspective this morning on the program, as always.
Thank you, Ladi. Have a great day.
And you too. Still to come on the program, many military-age Russians flee Vladimir Putin's Ukraine for Armenia and other former Soviet republics over the issue of draft. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Norway is against the EU proposal of setting an artificial price ceiling on Russian natural gas, and that's according to its oil and energy ministry, because it feels this could exacerbate the problem Europe already faces, namely gas shortage. This Stein Grimskud ministry spokesperson told the Izvestia news outlet Norway has become a key gas supplier for the EU after Russian flows dwindled due to sanctions and technical problems. The share of gas imported to the bloc from Russia has dropped from 41% to 9% since the start of the year, and that's according to the European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Samson. Norway used to be the European Union's second largest gas supplier, covering around 20% of its needs. Some analysts, however, note that Norway does not have the capacity to supply enough gas to the European Union to cover the loss of Russian flows. Let's talk now to Laddie Williams at this point in time. Laddie, business news from this conflict. The Biden team is reworking its plan for Russian oil price caps as markets soar. What's that about?
Yeah, so we know they've been trying to, defund Russia because they're trying to cut all the oil revenue, Russia is getting at this point because they believe that it's helping them actually, fund the war, at this time. So the caps, the talks about the caps have been on for a while now, but you see the World Bank there warning that, if all other emerging economies do not participate, then it might be pointless actually, putting this cap. And it's they've put the price between $63 and $64.
Right.
Trying to move towards the lower band, more if they can. But at the end of the day,
I mean, oil is selling for $90.
It's selling for $90, and capping Russian oil. We've seen Russia actually say that they're not going to sell to
anybody who tries to cap anything.
Participates in this capping. So the World Bank is seeing all of this and saying, you know what, it's not going to work if all emerging economies are not, together on this. But we see the analysts are also seeing that this could actually help, countries like India, have more bargaining power, with Russia, and they could get
even cheaper oil prices, and huge quantities.
Exactly. So, this would actually distort, the market even more and, cause more volatility.
Incidentally, you mentioned the World Bank. It's saying that energy prices will jump 60% this year. That's scary considering how far they've already jumped.
They've already jumped, yeah. So this year has been an incredible year for oil prices. Fine, but they are seeing that going forward that prices will actually come down, because when these caps actually work at some point, and the biggest exporter of fossil fuels, that's Russia,
right?
They see their production per day actually drop by 2 million barrels. So they're seeing that this would actually bring down prices, next year at some point, even though, most analysts actually still see
They don't see that, because, OPEC Plus
yeah,
has dropped its own production by more than 2 million barrels.
So
there are many countries in OPEC that can't even meet their quota. So there's still going to be, as you said, headwinds over this issue of supply.
Exactly. So when it comes to oil prices, it's still going to be elevated, if you look at it from a trading, perspective.
Viewpoint,
because once you cut, Russia's supply to the global market, that will cause, a lot of shortage.
Yes, we just finished talking about Norway and the EU and all of that.
And we know what a shortage means, for any market. Prices will definitely go
way up. Well, incidentally, the IEA says this energy crisis we're talking about that's been sparked by this war in Ukraine is going to speed up the green transition, this clean energy
which is
transition.
good, it sounds good, because we've seen
it happens.
If it happens, because, at COP26, most countries made a lot of pledges to, transition to cleaner energy. So the war came, and we saw how, in Europe, when Russia stopped, supplying
what happened?
Gas, they had to start looking for other alternatives, even though they still looked at, some dirtier alternatives, but they were more inclined to cleaner, alternatives. So the IEA is saying that at some point, global economies are going to be investing more, in cleaner energy, and this will actually speed up the process, because we're seeing the volatility, in the energy market. So rising prices, everyone will want to look for a cheaper alternative.
Absolutely.
At this point. So they're seeing more investment coming, up to 2030. They're seeing about $2 trillion, yearly investment, for clean energy. So it's a good sign. But obviously it's going to come with some teething pains.
With some teething pains, and some people are going to be left out.
Exactly.
Some usual suspects.
Yeah, that are not making such investments.
And in some instances cannot.
Yeah.
Laddie, thanks for that. How the markets have reacted to the European Central Bank interest rate hikes. I'm going to ask our viewers to wait for Business Morning and Busy to get that from you.
Exactly.
Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the sports. The United States White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the Biden administration will engage with Russia to bring home jailed U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner after a Russian court upheld her 9-year drug sentence. Ms. Griner, a two-time Olympic gold medalist, was arrested on February 17th at the Moscow airport a week before Russia sent troops into Ukraine. The souring of relations between Russia and the West has further complicated the talks between Washington and Moscow to secure her release.
This news only increases the urgency of our efforts to bring Brittany home. The Biden administration remains in regular touch with representatives from Brittany's family. And as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said this morning, the administration has continued to engage Russia through multiple channels in recent weeks to urge them to respond to our efforts to negotiate a resolution to this. As I've said many times before, This is a priority for us. It's going to continue to be a priority for us. And but what I also said at the end of the statement I made at the top is that we need Russia to negotiate in good faith. Look, it's fair to say that we have been in contact, right? And the lines of communication continue to be open. I'm certainly not going to negotiate from here, from this podium or in public, and so therefore we're not going to get into greater details. But again, we have been very clear that Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan need to be home. They should be home right away.
Finnish Fencing and Pentathlon Federation President Jonas Lehtinen has urged the International Fencing Federation to maintain the ban on Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Mr. Lehtinen believes the FIA would send, quote, a very strong message should it lift sanctions against Russia and its military ally Belarus. His comments come after it was revealed that a decision on the status of athletes from the two nations is set to be made at the next month Congress. Mr. Lehtinen expects that members will be asked to vote on whether Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials should be allowed to return to international competition. However, the Finnish official insisted that it was not the time to undo the exclusion while Ukraine continues to be attacked by Russian forces. And finally on the program, Nikolai Salnikov fled Vladimir Putin's military mobilization for the Armenian capital, Yerevan. Now the IT worker sees no point in returning to Russia. Tens of thousands of military-age Russian men have taken their chances abroad rather than risk being conscripted and sent to Ukraine. Salnikov fled 2 days after the Russian president declared his partial mobilization in late September. He says, many of my friends have left, only a couple of them are still in Russia. Some people came here, some went to Kazakhstan, others to Uzbekistan, all over. In general, they will all be leaving Russia somehow. It's not clear what the future holds in Russia. The draft to cope with the lack of manpower amidst a string of defeats in Ukraine has been unpopular and chaotic. Armenia allows Russians to enter without an international passport and stay without a visa for up to 6 months. So it's one of the most popular destinations for the new wave of emigres. Many of them are young, skilled professionals, and Yerevan's central bank has upgraded its GDP projections because of the influx.
Armenia That's our program. Public how many Russians
Thank you for being with us today. My name is Ladi Akeri-Duluali. There's an update of all our stories throughout the day, especially on The World Today at 5 o'clock. But for now, you have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.